the left part, which is probably the most controversial bit, basically means being against free market neoliberal economics, which has been a long journey. I mean, if you know me, I started off as a libertarian. I wrote a book 5 years ago called The Defenders of Liberty, where I defended Austrian school and to some extent the Chicago School of Economics. As time has gone on, as my interest in politics and power have, and what has actually happened in the real world, and I've started to study just evidence, like what has actually happened, what has happened to our country, what has happened in other countries. I start to see that what may make sense in abstract theory, what makes logical sense, doesn't necessarily apply to the real world, because, to some extent, you need the government to do stuff, and government doing stuff to many people. And you see, to many people online, this is old hat. But the reality is, and you will know this as well as me, Nick, that in this country, Margaret Thatcher still reigns in so many places, in the minds of conservatives, in the minds of people on the right, such that it is like an impenetrable brick wall. Okay, I've tried, and you just can't get through. And recently, it was the 100th birthday of Thatcher, and literally up and down my timeline, everybody had to pay homage to Maggie. But what has it actually got our country? It is, and this is the biggest part of it, really. It's not simply an economic thing; it's a social thing too. Why do we have mass immigration? Why do we have low birth rates? Why were so many women dragooned into the workforce and sold the idea that being chained behind a desk and working for Microsoft was liberation? This was all neoliberalism, right? It wasn't Stalin doing that. It was Thatcher. It was neoliberal economics. It was Milton Friedman telling you that money doesn't see color. So that's why I think at the current time, sensible center left is the political formula I'm going with, even if it proves unpopular in the short term. I still do not see reform. I mean, reform are set to sweep. All right, they're set to have an absolute landslide. And yet, within reform, I still don't really see any advance over stuff people would have said a decade ago. Reform literally act like the past 10 years have not even happened. And they want to have the conversation as if it was 2014, and we're not. Like, that's not where we've been. So I'm not going to just pretend that, we're just going to go back there. So that's my pitch, Nick. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, there's lots I agree with. I mean, some small qualms would be when you talk about Fuentes and Carlson, and we're not having that conversation. I mean, one, we might just not have caught up with America, but more likely, the Israel lobby question is just much bigger in America. It's just we have the question here of one side saying that war is a genocide, the other side saying, what about the safety of Jewish people on British streets? So we have definitely that debate and the constant protests and all that.
No, we don't. We don't. When the synagogue thing happened, every single political party was absolutely united, and Keir Starmer said the same thing as Tommy Robinson. When Israeli hooligans were banned from Aston Villa, this only happened a couple of weeks ago, Keir Starmer, Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe, every single Tory, and Tommy Robinson were on the same page. So let's not pretend that it's a two sides thing, because as far as I can see, every political party is on the same page. Right? Why? So you're asking me to basically segregate my mind and be like, right, over there in America, they're having this conversation, but I'm not meant to spot the same thing happening here. Why is that?
Well, I was trying to say that it rears its head here in slightly different ways, whereas in America, it's very much about funding and, our government is controlled by a foreign country, foreign entity, and those kind of things, which don't seem quite as relevant here, because it doesn't seem that we're as controlled by said foreign country here, but you may disagree. But I was saying it raises its head here in a slightly different way. That might be why that hasn't caught up here. That was just my claim. But Farage, you were a little harsh on Farage on digital ID because he did push back quite strongly on digital ID. You said he was talking about smoky bacon crisps. But, these are small sort of qualms with your opening statement. But the Thatcher thing is obviously completely right. And we can get into that because you talked about the free market in one of your videos. So I just had William Clouston on. So, it's not a free market podcast. But yeah, I think there are definitely compelling arguments there. And that debate is happening in things like NatCom here, and it's happening a little bit in the SDP. They're very small, of course. People like Nick Timothy agree with it, but yes, it's not really. There's no main political party that offers a combination of social conservatism and economic sort of more ideas to the left, which is I discussed with William Clouston. Why is that not offered when that's where most British people are? So that is strange. So in a way, you're just saying you're where most British people are, which is social conservatism combined with skepticism about a rampant neoliberal economics.
Well, I'm not sure. So, okay, this is where things get a little bit nuanced, because when you start saying, well, I'm a social conservative, the thing is that there are a lot of problems with conservatism as it has manifested, and it's not just the free market bit as well. And part of what I was doing in that series, there are lots of, like, conservatives have a habit of always kind of being reactive, of how can I say, just thinking, just not actually thinking anything through and just kind of reacting in the moment. You see this on many. If you've been through enough news cycles, you see it enough times. So there are actually elements of the social conservative platform. There's one of the videos I made was on the notion of the family, the kind of bourgeois ideal of the 2.4 family being the highest good. I talked about birth rates, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of conservatives are really concerned, like for a lot of people, a lot of conservatives, getting a job and starting a family is like the best thing you can possibly do, right? My analysis of the situation is that may have been correct at a certain time. It's not necessarily correct. It's not necessarily the be all and end all right now, because we're at a different moment in the civilizational cycle. And actually, we need men of a different stripe for this moment. So I hesitate to just say, well, it's simply like a rearticulation of the SDP or something like that. Although I will say that in the current, like in theory, the closest thing to this actually exists in the Labour Party. It's called Blue Labour. They have some problems. They're pretty heavily Zionist, for example. But like in theory, that was the Morgan McSweeney idea, the whole Blue Labour thing. But we've seen the execution has been absolutely woeful. And part of the problem is, of course, that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are neoliberals. Really, they're basically just doing the bidding of Tony Blair. We know that. So it's kind of like they're wearing it as a mask rather than actually being it. They're trying to save. I mean, even now, what they're doing with taxes and so on is really just what people may have called 10 years ago austerity. It's just like David Cameron again, but they're in an even more dire situation now because of, literally because COVID racked up the biggest debt since World War II.
Yeah, I just saw Starmer attacking Kemley on austerity the other day. I thought you're going to do worse austerity. But, very interesting. I mean, Clouston basically agrees with Lord Glassman about Blue Labour. And as you say, McSweeney, he's very sympathetic to Blue Labour. He says not totally aligned, but sympathetic. But as you say, it hasn't been the agenda they followed. Maybe we could just go through some of your videos then, because I've watched all 8 of them. And I don't have like massive like data to come back. I just have my reckons. As I said, to use a Michelin Web thing, I'm just from a northern state comprehensive. I just have my little reckons, but I'll come back with a few things. So your first one is on ethno-narcissism, you called it. And your basic claim is that, okay, it's all right to, have this country with just one ethnicity if that's what you want, but you won't compete in the global market because if other nations use a much wider talent pool, they will just end up out competing you and they could essentially take you over. So I thought that was a reasonable point. It seems to me it's almost like all nations would have to go nationalist, and to some extent there's a sort of implied ethnic components that at the same time, which in a way is kind of a movement we see happening. We see there's a nationalist movement, obviously in America with MAGA, obviously in Germany, ADF, and so on, and everywhere across Europe.
Mhm.
So in a way, it's a kind of tacit multilateral agreement. And in a way, you could also say Brexit was us as typical pioneer legends doing that unilaterally and saying, right, we're getting out and we're sort of getting away from centralization. And, it's a sort of experiment. We don't know how it's gone. And you could almost say the euro as well was an example of that. I was just thinking. But it's almost like to do it unilaterally is a risk, just like unilateral disarmament, which your mate Corbyn advocates. But, so it seems to me it's something you'd all have to do at once. I mean, but I see your problem. If you just do it and the other countries don't, they will ultimately win.
Yeah, no, it's worth mentioning that this is not a defense of mass immigration. Okay, I was not saying you should have no control over your borders whatsoever. Okay, because of this, which I think a lot of people took it as for some reason, as if I haven't spent the past decade being against mass immigration. Okay, what I was talking about was a very specific incentives problem at the level of the individual firm or the individual football club or then the individual country. And it's literally that problem of if everybody else is going around the world and hiring the best that they can find, if you're the one club or firm or country who's not doing that, do you risk losing competitive advantage against them? Do you fall behind? And this is one of those things. I mean, I've got a book here by John Mearsheimer called How States Think. And it's always this game of keeping up with the Joneses. It's not necessarily what you want to do, but if you don't do it, you get left behind, which is actually the argument Tony Blair uses to back up virtually all of his arguments, I've noticed over the years as well. What I was trying to do in that first video is seriously present this, like, what is the actual answer to that? Because it strikes me that let's just take the football as one example, right? If Manchester United were like, right, we're just going to only hire English as an example, unless Manchester United could literally like hire the England football team, right? I.e., unless they could have a monopoly on the best English players, I think they'd struggle more than they are at the moment. I know you're, but you know what I'm saying, right?
3 wins on the trot, mate. Yeah,
they wouldn't be winning they wouldn't be winning like the Champions League and the league and so on.
Of course, in their greatest era, it was largely youth academy players combined with some Irish and Welsh. But I take your point.
I understand, right? That Sir Alex Ferguson, one of the all-time greats, had a strong British core to that team, but that's not the way that. See, my point is that the game that once you've started with Eric Cantona and Ginola and Arsenal have got Patrick Vieira and so on and so forth, the game has already started. And you fast forward 20 years, right? And the model now is not that Alex Ferguson model. It's like it's the Man City thing of some massively wealthy sheikh giving billions of dollars, and literally it's the Galacticos idea, right? Even though Barcelona were right there, the model has still become you just go around the world poaching the best players. That's the way. Would you agree? That is the way the game has gone from like Jimmy Hill in 1992, arguing like make everything youth and stop all of this happening, to today. It's definitely not gone Jimmy Hill's way. Would you agree with that? It's gone the way of the Man City and the kind of rainbow coalition of players from around the world. My point was a purely technical one. Why has that happened? Mm-hmm. Right? What is what are the incentives for that happening? What are the counter arguments against that? Because it strikes me that the pure meritocracy model, okay, and you see it in its rawest form in football, because football's like almost like raw capitalism, if you want to put it that way. How do you stop it if it wins? Is the point? It wins.
Yeah.